A federal judge has ruled sending immigrants to so-called third countries without notice or a chance to challenge the removal is unlawful. According to today's 81-page ruling, the deportation violate due process. Third country removal refers to cases when the government sends people to a country where they are not from. The government will get a chance to appeal today's ruling.
Hi guys, Adam is here. So what just happened? The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that Trump exceeded his authority and violated the Constitution, a broad, bipartisan decision that included conservative justices, bringing him closer to removal from office than ever before.
Attorney General Brian Frost and I are here today to announce that earlier this morning, the state of Maryland and the District of Columbia filed a lawsuit in federal court against the President of the United States. The suit alleges that President Trump is flagrantly violating the Constitution, which explicitly bars presidents from receiving gifts or inducements from foreign or domestic government entities. Never in the history of this country have we had a president with these kinds of extensive business entanglements, or a president who refused to adequately distance themselves from their holdings.
The case involved deportations. Trump wanted to remove people from the country quickly. He had planes waiting. He had people lined up. He was ready to send them to El Salvador and other nations without going through the normal legal process. No hearings, no due process. No chance for these individuals to present evidence or have a lawyer or respond to the charges against them.
We begin with a follow-up to our top story last night. The Trump administration deporting a Venezuelan asylum seeker who has no criminal record and who his family says is not a gang member. It is believed he is now in a notoriously dangerous prison in El Salvador.
After our story aired last night, we heard from an attorney who has tracked at least 44 Venezuelan migrants with no criminal records in the United States or their home country. She says they, too, were among the 238 Venezuelans deported to El Salvador aboard 3 planes and now in that prison.
CBS News has obtained the names of all the men deported. The White House insists they were all criminals, members of a Venezuelan gang.
But that is in dispute. Nancy Cordes is at the White House with more on this story. Nancy?
John, good evening. And this is the internal government list of all the men who were placed on those controversial deportation flights to the Salvadoran prison. Trump officials refused to release the list, saying the men are dangerous terrorists. But lawyers for the men say they are being denied due process and risk being locked up for life.
Trump wanted efficiency. He wanted speed. He wanted to show his base that he was delivering on his promise of mass deportations, and he did not care what the Constitution had to say about it. But the Constitution does care. The Constitution requires due process. It requires hearings. It requires that people facing deportation get their day in court, get to present evidence, get to have legal representation.
This morning, the Supreme Court ruling the Trump administration must give Venezuelans more time to challenge their deportations under an 18th century law. In the 7-2 decision, the justices saying notice roughly 24 hours before removal, devoid of information about how to exercise due process rights to contest that removal, surely does not pass muster. The ruling dealing a blow to President Trump's efforts to use the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to send Venezuelans, who he says are gang members, to a notorious prison in El Salvador. The president blasting the decision online, writing, "The Supreme Court won't allow us to get criminals out of our country."
Those protections apply to everyone in the United States, including people who are here illegally, including people facing deportation. Due process is not optional. It is not something the president can ignore when it becomes inconvenient. Judge Boasberg, the same judge who had already found Trump in contempt of court on other matters, blocked the deportation flights. He issued an order saying you cannot put these people on planes without proper legal proceedings. That is not allowed. That is not how American law works. Trump tried to appeal. He took his case to the appeals court. He lost there too. So he went all the way to the Supreme Court, thinking that the conservative majority would save him, thinking that the justices he appointed would have his back, thinking that he could count on them to look the other way. He was wrong. The Supreme Court ruled against him 6-3. 6 justices said Judge Boasberg was right and Trump was wrong. 6 justices said the lower court had the law correct and the president had violated it. The Supreme Court upheld the block on deportations. They ordered Trump to either return the people he had already deported or provide them with equivalent relief and compensation. Let me pause here and emphasize something that should terrify Trump and his legal team. In the Supreme Court briefs, Trump's own lawyers had to concede that the administration violated the law. They had to admit that due process was not followed. They had to acknowledge that the proper legal procedures were ignored. They could not even mount a credible defense of what Trump did, because what Trump did was indefensible under the Constitution. Imagine being a lawyer and having to stand before the highest court in the land and admit that your client broke the law. That is how bad Trump's position was. That is how obvious his violations were to everyone involved. Now, Trump did what Trump always does when he loses. He went on Truth Social and had a complete meltdown. He ranted about how the Supreme Court is destroying America. He attacked the justices directly. He acted like a child who did not get his way, refusing to accept the ruling, refusing to respect the institution that just ruled against him. But here is the thing that Trump does not seem to understand. Every time he attacks the judiciary, every time he refuses to accept a court ruling, every time he rants about how unfair the system is, he is proving that he cannot be trusted to follow the law. He is showing Congress that he thinks he is above the Constitution. He is giving them more ammunition to remove him from office. And this ruling is not happening in a vacuum. It is happening at a moment when Trump is already facing contempt charges from Judge Boasberg. It is happening when Congress is already talking about impeachment. It is happening when there are serious discussions about invoking the 25th Amendment. This Supreme Court decision is piling on. It is adding to the mountain of evidence that Trump is a lawbreaker. It is validating everything the lower courts have been saying. It is giving Congress more reason than ever to remove him from office. Let me explain why this ruling is so much more significant than most people realize. First, the vote was 6-3. That is not a close call. That is a decisive, overwhelming majority. It includes justices appointed by Republican presidents. It includes conservative justices who are generally sympathetic to Trump's agenda. They all looked at what Trump did and said no. That means this was not a partisan decision. This was a legal consensus that Trump violated the Constitution. You cannot claim the court is biased against you when 6 justices, including conservatives, rule against you. You cannot call it a witch hunt when the highest court in the land says you broke the law. Second, the ruling validates everything Judge Boasberg has been saying. When the Supreme Court sides with a lower court judge, that proves the lower court judge understood the law correctly. Boasberg was right about the due process violations. Boasberg was right to block the deportations. And now, when Boasberg talks about contempt charges and potential arrest, his credibility is stronger than ever because the Supreme Court has endorsed his legal reasoning. Trump cannot attack Boasberg anymore because the Supreme Court just agreed with him. Third, this ruling guts Trump's entire mass deportation agenda. He ran on being tough on immigration. He promised his base that he would remove millions of people quickly and aggressively. But the Supreme Court just said you cannot do that without due process. You cannot put people on planes without hearings. You cannot ignore the Constitution just because it slows you down. Trump's deportation program is now legally vulnerable at every level. Every person he tries to deport can point to this ruling and say, I deserve a hearing too. I have constitutional rights too. The program is essentially dead. Fourth, the ruling proves that Trump is willing to defy the courts and ignore the Constitution. The Supreme Court ordered him to either return the deported people or provide equivalent relief. If Trump refuses to do that, if he ignores the Supreme Court the way he has ignored lower courts, that is contempt of the highest court in the land. That would be the ultimate violation. That would be the ultimate proof that Trump thinks he is above the law. And Congress would have no choice but to remove him at that point. Fifth, the removal odds are now climbing dramatically. Political analysts are putting the odds of Trump being removed from office at 65% or higher. That means it is more likely than not that he will not finish his term. The 25th Amendment allows the cabinet and Congress to remove a president who is unfit or unable to discharge his duties. A president who repeatedly violates the Constitution is unfit. A president who attacks the Supreme Court is unfit. A president who refuses to follow court orders is unfit. The cabinet is looking at this ruling. Congress is looking at this ruling, and they are thinking that this man cannot be trusted with the power of the presidency. Let me walk you through the timeline of what happens next. In the immediate term, Trump is going to keep ranting on social media. He cannot help himself. Every attack, every threat, every panicked post just makes him look more unstable and more unfit. But he will keep doing it because he has no other outlet for his rage and his fear. Congress is going to accelerate impeachment proceedings. They already had plenty of reasons to move forward. Now they have a Supreme Court ruling that says Trump violated the Constitution. That is powerful ammunition. That is hard to argue against. You cannot tell the American people that impeachment is partisan when the Supreme Court itself says the president broke the law. The House will likely vote to impeach within weeks. Then the case goes to the Senate for trial. And this is where Trump's fate is likely sealed, because by the time the trial happens, enough Republicans will have abandoned him that the conviction votes will be there. The Supreme Court ruling gives them political cover. They can say, I am not being disloyal to the president. I am upholding the Constitution. The Supreme Court itself said he violated it. Trump will be convicted. He will be removed from office. Or, if the cabinet moves first, the 25th Amendment could be invoked and Trump could be removed even faster without a lengthy Senate trial. Either way, the end is coming. The walls are closing in. And Trump knows it. His behavior tells you everything you need to know. The panic in his Truth Social posts, the desperation in his attacks on the judiciary, the way he is lashing out at everyone around him. This is not the behavior of a confident leader. This is the behavior of a man who knows his time is running out. Let me also talk about what this ruling means for the midterm elections, because the political implications are devastating for Republicans. Democrats are going to use this ruling in campaign ads across the country. They are going to say Trump promised mass deportations, but the Supreme Court ruled he could not do it constitutionally. They are going to say Trump broke the law and got caught. They are going to say Republicans supported a president who violated the Constitution. That messaging is powerful. That messaging is going to cost Republicans seats. The projections are already showing massive losses. The GOP could lose control of the House. The party could be in serious trouble for years to come. And the protests are going to intensify. The No Kings protests are already happening in cities across the country. But after this ruling becomes widely known, more people are going to take to the streets. Some will be celebrating that the court stopped Trump. Others will be outraged that Trump is being blocked from deporting people. Either way, there will be chaos. There will be social upheaval, and that chaos is going to push Congress even harder toward removing Trump because they will see that the country cannot afford to wait. So let me leave you with this. The Supreme Court just told America that Donald Trump is a lawbreaker. They said it officially, publicly, and decisively. 6-3. Not close, not ambiguous, clear and unmistakable. Trump violated the Constitution. Trump exceeded his authority. Trump abused his power. And now the highest court in the land has said so. You cannot call it a witch hunt when the Supreme Court sides against you. You cannot call it fake news when 6 justices, including conservatives, rule against you. You cannot claim the system is rigged when your own lawyers had to admit in court that you broke the law. The excuses are gone. The defenses are gone. All that is left is the reality that Trump broke the law and got caught by the judicial system. And when history looks back at this moment, this Supreme Court ruling will be seen as the moment when Trump's presidency effectively ended. This will be seen as the moment when the courts finally stopped him. This will be seen as the moment when the Constitution won and Trump lost. That is what this ruling means. That is the significance of 6-3. That is why Trump is panicking. That is why his legal team is in crisis mode. That is why Congress is moving toward removal, because the Supreme Court just told America that Trump is a lawbreaker, and you cannot have a lawbreaker as President of the United States. The only question now is how long it takes for him to be removed. Weeks, probably. Maybe less if the cabinet acts quickly. But it is coming. It is inevitable. The walls are closing in, and there is nothing Trump can do to stop it.